Welcome to Faith in 5, a weekly video devotional designed to discuss practical spiritual concepts in 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Mark Vandella. I've been on a lot of service-oriented trips with students in my career as a student ministries leader. And I remember one trip that we took. It was to Chicago. And a number of times throughout these trips, we would do things that were difficult. They were counter to the way that our brains normally work. And one of the things that we did in this trip to Chicago that I remember really clearly, we would pack up sandwiches into brown paper bags, and then we'd set out on the city. And the goal was to find people who were homeless and hungry and give them a sandwich. But the ultimate goal wasn't to just hand a bag and run like a ding-dong ditch kind of thing. The goal was to sit down and have a conversation. It was really all about human dignity and having a conversation with somebody who maybe hasn't been called by name in a very long time, or has not had anybody ask them about their story or their life. And we walked up to one man. He was sitting there, and he looked like he needed a sandwich. And so I looked around, and all these kids are kind of like, I don't know, you go. I don't want to go, you go. So, as a leader, I kind of had to, even though everything inside of me was saying, I don't know. So I walked up, and I said, hey, we've got some sandwiches here. Could you use one? And he lit up. He said, yeah, that would be great. And then I did the next easiest thing. I asked him what his name was, right? That's if I met somebody at a party, or I met somebody at church, or I met somebody where I would say, hey, so what's your name, right? So he told me that his name was Ronnie Brown, and I had a couple little yo, hey, great, good to meet you. Where are you from? How long you been in Chicago? And as we got talking, one of the students got more comfortable. And so one of the students said, Ronnie Brown, no way. Ronnie Brown is a running back for the Miami Dolphins, and this guy just lit up even more. And he was a Dolphins fan, and they started talking about football. And this kid told him how Ronnie Brown was his running back on his fantasy football team, and they just had this great conversation. And it was beautiful. It was so human. And we're in the series called the 10-Second Rule, which is based on a book by Claire DeGraff. And in the book, Claire says, you know what, we have this, we are wired for self-preservation. All those feelings that the high school students and myself were feeling about, I don't know if I should do this, or what if he asks me something that I don't know how to answer, or what if this person isn't homeless and I offend them? All these things are self-preservation. And so Claire says in his life, he's realized that most of his life, that human nature piece has been training us to be disobedient to what God asks us to do. He calls it disobedience training. And he said the more we respond in ways to those things that say, don't do that, the more we're trained to not respond to what God asks us to do. See, everything that Jesus did and taught was counterintuitive. It's a counter-narrative. And Jesus says in Luke 9, 23 through 24, he's talking to a crowd and he's setting an expectation for what people can think and reasonably expect if they're going to follow him. And he says that if any of you want to be my follower, Jesus says you must give up your own life. You have to take up your cross and follow me. The Message version says that you have to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. And so Claire says in the 10-Second Rule, as we walk through this series based on his book, one of the principles in his book is to, if you think it, respond. So think it, do it. Basically, we have been trained that when Jesus essentially prompts us, when we get this something, I should respond in this way, we have regularly been trained to walk away from that and say no. And Claire says that the 10-second rule challenges us to, in those moments, if we respond within 10 seconds, we have a better chance of doing what Jesus asks us to do in Luke 9. Lay down your life. Surrender your life to me, and you will have more meaning. See, Rick Warren says in his book, Purpose Driven Life, he says that all of us are going to surrender to something. If it's not God, we surrender to expectations. We surrender to opinions. We surrender to money. We surrender to our pride, our ego. Right, so we're all going to surrender to something, and I admit that I surrender to other things all the time over God. The point of the 10-second rule is Claire tried to find something that on a more regular basis he could do so that his faith was not routine. and that he would regularly engage what God was asking him to do. So this week, as you go out and you live your faith and you live your life, practice the 10-second rule. In the first principle of the 10-second rule is to think it, do it. If you have something that hits you that you're reasonably certain Jesus is asking you to do, act on it within 10 seconds and start to see what happens. Push through the disobedience training that you've had, and you might meet people like Ronnie Brown. You might give dignity to somebody else. You might have an opportunity to pray for somebody that you wouldn't have otherwise done. And if you say you're going to pray, do so within the next 10 seconds so that it actually happens, because that's what Jesus asks us to do.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to follow us each week, click here to subscribe. And if you want to take it a little bit further, click here for discussion materials.